All right, so today we have Thom Cavalli. Welcome. I'm here to talk to you about your new class, Alchemy on Mars, with Jung Academy. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's really nice to meet you and to do this
Yeah,
interview with you. I'm looking forward
yeah.
to it.
Excellent. Likewise, same here. I'm a big fan of alchemy, and I was checking out some of your work, and I ordered one of your books, embodying Osiris. So that's good. So I'm really excited to chat with you today. And so maybe we can start off with just sort of how did you come to work with alchemy? I mean, that's a big question, but I'd love to hear it.
Uh, I'm going to preface answering that question by prefacing it with the idea here that the history of my interest in alchemy, which actually goes back to childhood, kind of reflects, I think, the history and development of alchemy itself. I'll keep this concise, so don't get
As
nervous.
above, so below. I think it's great.
Thank you. I was going to say that. Um, so what I mean by that is there's a pre-conscious alchemy that stretches back all the way 5,000 years ago to ancient Egypt. Of course, the word alchemy derives from the etymology of the word chem, which means the black. And it doesn't mean black magic. It refers to the fertile mud of the inundation from the Nile, etc. The point is that, most books, most scholars, when they talk about the beginning of alchemy, typically it'll be dated either 300 BC or 300 AD, with either Bolus of Mendes or with Zosimos, which really had more to do with spiritual alchemy. But for my money, as it were, it stretches all the way back. And I've written about this. I teach about the ancient origins of alchemy. With that preface said, to answer your question, the prehistory of my introduction to alchemy, I don't know how old I was, but I was a child, and um, I have some a very minimal gratitude towards my father. That's a whole other story,
Yeah.
but I do thank him for two things. Maybe some of you are aware of what we called back then the rubber egg. And the rubber egg is you simply take an egg, a raw egg in its shell, and you put it into vinegar. And
Mhm.
you leave it overnight, and it does this really magical chemical thing. And in the morning, it literally is a rubber egg. It does something to the shell that makes it rubbery. Uh, that always stuck with me. I mean, I didn't have much words at all, much less a word for alchemy, but that was kind of like an alchemical transformation to this child's eyes.
Sure.
The other thing is a little bit more complicated. This has to do with the structure of the Niels Bohr atom. For
Okay.
those of you who remember, who are old enough to remember, Niels Bohr structure of the atom had the nucleus at the beginning, at the middle, and it had these orbiting protons and electrons. It was like a mini solar system. And that's the key
Mhm.
because my father kind of, and he didn't know much about physics, that's for sure, but he did tell me as an introduction to this concept of an atom is that it's kind of like the nucleus. He didn't call it that, but the middle piece there was a planet. And on that planet, there are these little creatures that live on that planet. And within them, they have even smaller atoms. This is well before we knew about quarks and
Yeah.
subatomic particles. So, and within those creatures were even smaller,
Yeah.
and it gave me the sense of infinity. At the same time, you could reverse that and it goes the other way around, and that is that on this planet they are orbiting. He didn't call them neutron protons, but there were other planets. It really was a picture of the solar system, as above, so below.
That's amazing.
These were the two images that kind of stuck in my mind for all these many, many years. By high school, we were taking my least favorite subject, which has now become my most favorite subject, and that's history, particularly ancient history. But we were studying American history, and in those days, and I think this is lost today, America, the United States, was referred to as the melting pot.
Yeah.
And so this is a land, this is an experimental country of diversity. I know, and of course, I don't want to get into politics, but there's a lot of polarization, and in Jungian language, the opposites are really in tension with one another. So that's high school. I'll skip over college, although I majored in fine art. And I
Okay.
think that's relevant because
Mhm.
one of my passions for alchemy has to do with its beauty. And I mean, its artistic beauty
Yeah.
in terms of its woodcuts, engravings, etc., and its language also as well. But I was also a fine arts major as well as psychology. Graduate school. This is where I was interning at a substance abuse agency that went by the acronym CRASH,
Mhm.
which we never called it by the full name, which is Community Resources and Self-Help. We called it CRASH.
Makes sense.
It made sense. I didn't realize that until many years later after I was, during graduate school, involved in a head-on collision. Some sailor
Oh,
fell asleep at the wheel, crashed into me. And so there's this kind of simultaneity between the place I was interning, crash, and the crash.
right.
That
Personal
was,
crash, outer
yeah,
crash. Yeah.
exactly.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Glad you
that,
were okay.
thankfully, it was a miracle, really, because in those
Mm.
days we didn't even have seat belts.
Wow.
Um, Fortunately, I had bought this $300 car from the Hare Krishna ashram, so I think it was blessed.
Sure, man. Yeah, let's go with that.
In any case, that was my introduction to synchronicity. Now, at the time, I was treating substance abuse people, and I came to recognize that there was a lot of manipulation, not just on their part, but I, as a therapist, on my part. In those days, we didn't have the word intersubjectivity. I'm not going to get
Mhm.
into all of that, but the point is, there's this space that I realized, that unconscious space, that the patient and I were kind of doing a very mercurial manipulation. And of course, Mercury is the patron of all alchemy.
Of course.
So that led me into writing a dissertation on alchemical psychology. So that really launched me. I tried to translate my dissertation into a book form, and I very quickly realized I wasn't old enough.
Oh, okay.
And I had to put it away for a good 10 years. And then when I did mature, then I took pen to page and began seriously writing. I know
And
that's a
is that
long answer to a quick question, but that's the
no, it's
history.
great. I mean, alchemy is all about process, so I think it's really fitting that you took us a little bit through your process to get there.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had a
Yeah.
crash, your own personal Negredo moment, I mean, there's so many ways we can interpret that symbolically. So I think that's really relevant. That dissertation that became a book 10 years later, is that what became alchemical psychology?
Yes. There's a little bit of a story behind that as well.
Let's do it. We've got time. Yeah.
Everything in my home is has a story. So don't we touch anything, it has a story. Um, I was dating a South Indian woman
Mm,
um, who ultimately became my wife. But when we met, she had been laid off as a aerospace engineer, and she quickly got a job. But the job, and now I'm located in Southern California. She had moved and bought a home in Utah. Anyway, we had this long kind of romantic relationship, flying back and forth for some time. Finally, it got serious, and I said, "You got to move back." And so she did. And she moved right across the street from where we had met, which was Chapman
mm.
University. I'd given a talk at a Jungian alchemical conference. She arrived late, and I fell madly in love. And
Wow.
so
Oh, man.
when she moved back, the what happened? She didn't move in with me. She had her own home, and every weekend I would go, meet with her, and we'd have breakfast every Sunday morning. And at that time, I started to write these pieces, and they were alchemical themed. And ultimately, over the course of 10 weeks, every week I would bring and read over Sunday brunch the piece that I had written, this alchemical piece that I had written. By the 10th time I had done that, we both looked at each other and realized, I'm writing a book.
That's a great story. Wow. I need that.
In any event, those 10 pieces that I had written were all based on alchemical recipes. Now,
Mhm.
if you read the book or you want to know something about the book, those 10 recipes are the labor of love around which I wrapped a beginning and an end.
Yep.
And it became a book. It finally gained book form, and it was miraculous that in those days, you didn't have internet as handy as much as we have today. I
Mhm.
called up Putnam, and with some trickery and Mercury on my side, I was able to talk to the editor. And lo and behold, he said, "I want to publish your book."
That's
So
that's the dream.
yeah. So the second part, the subchapter, subtitle is Old Recipes for Living in a New World. So that book, Alchemical Psychology, really truly is a labor of love.
Yeah. That's beautiful, and that's a great segue maybe into one of the questions I really wanted to ask you. You know, we're going to get to your class, and hopefully your class kind of is part of this. But you know, we can study these things for sort of the intellectual curiosity or you know the history of ideas. But I think a big thing that draws us to things like Jungian psychology and alchemy is that there is a real practical application for these things. So I wanted to sort of ask you, you know, if you had a well-meaning but uninitiated person come up to you and say, like, you know, you're always writing about this stuff. How can I use it in my life? Like, what is the quick and dirty explanation you might give someone who wants to know but just doesn't have a clue? How would you start with someone like that?
It's such a timely and an excellent question. And it really describes my bent, my work, my
Mhm.
aim. We have Dr. Carl C.G. Jung, to thank for bringing alchemy into the modern world. If you've tried to, and I say try to read, the collected works, the volumes that he's written on alchemy, particularly the last one, Mysterium Connectionis. I mean, I had to literally do a study class to get through that book. It's
It's rough.
really cryptic. It's really difficult. But we have him to thank for decoding, and bringing alchemy out of the mist of history, particularly the Renaissance period, where you were dealing with a different kind of consciousness.
Mhm.
Duality didn't have sharp boundaries as much as it does today. Um, anyway, what I thank him for is not just bringing alchemy into the modern world, but also giving us certain tools, certain methods. Um, but again, reading him is very, very difficult, and I don't want to dissuade people from reading him. I oftentimes have people who ask, "Where do I start?" And I always tell them start with his biography, Memory Streams Reflection. He only wrote the first four chapters, but it's a good way of understanding who this man is.
Mhm.
Why I'm mentioning all of that is that I take it to the next step. So where Jung formed a psychology out of what had been really principally a philosophy, um, um, I want to bring utility to it. So to more directly answer your question, if somebody asks me that, I start where people are.
Mhm.
What most people, if you mention the word alchemy, what do you think they say?
Probably led into gold.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the meme, as it were.
Mhm. Right.
And that's the place to begin. All right. Um, th- there are a lot of reasons why alchemy is difficult to read and understand because it's highly symbolic. But we all can understand a little bit of symbolism and certainly a bit of metaphor. So when somebody says, yeah, it's about changing lead into gold, that's a good place to begin. I'm not, I am not, let me disclosure here, I'm not a physical alchemist. I'm
Mhm.
psychological alchemist. And so my primary goal work in life is therapy and
Mhm.
coaching. So I don't have a formula. You follow the three stages and the three forces and all of that stuff, but I draw from it when it's necessary, where it fits the person and where they are in their life. So I want to then make use of it. So in terms of lead into gold, I say, well, where's the lead in your life? Well, what does that really mean? What does
Mhm.
that mean metaphorically? Everybody has an answer for that. You
Right.
know,
Right.
lead is the lead in our lives could be a breakdown, it could be a crisis, it could be trauma, it could be all kinds of symptoms.
Yep.
I think, the problem that I have with the way most psychologists, contemporary psychologists work today, is behavior. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for one example, is all that. It's all cognitive to the extent that it leaves out soul.
Right.
So I think that my work is trying to tap in, as Jung was, into reconnecting people with soul. Jung, as well as myself, are less interested in fixing problems.
Hmm.
Jung's psychological and psychotherapy has to do with expanding consciousness. So,
Right.
what the lead of your crisis? It could be a depression, it could be panic, it could be anxiety, it can be insomnia, it can be whatever. Um, as you begin to shift to a larger perspective, what was enormous one day over a course of doing this kind of work gets smaller and smaller and smaller
Hmm.
because you now have a healthy context. So that leads us to the symbolism of gold. Now, when we talk about lead into gold alchemically, we have to understand it's not so much magic. It really is pre-chemistry, as it were, because the idea here that the alchemists had and is that there were bits, what they call scintilla seeds of gold already in the lead.
Mm.
And by focusing conscious awareness and attention on that, then the gold begins to germinate. So the change, the transformation comes from inside to the outside until the lead recedes and the gold begins to shine in the foreground. Now, that's a beautiful image, but it has clinical implications because, while you are, arrested or fixated, with the lead of your life, this depression, and feeling miserable, sometimes all it takes is a bit of reminding that there's a reason why the unconscious has you depressed. And if we can only focus on its hidden message,
Hmm.
which in archetypal terms is feeding and becoming aware of the archetype of the self, then it begins to germinate. So that's a, a quick way of trying
Yeah.
to translate, what most people know about alchemy being led into gold into practical application. Now, how do we do that? That's a whole other question.
Right.
But we can use psychological typology. I do a lot of dream analysis,
Hmm.
etc. So we dive in to the lead of the unconscious, however it presents itself, and we
Yeah.
begin to work there.
No, that's fascinating. My field of study is myth and symbolism, and I've also picked up a little astrology along the way. And I know that lead is
Okay.
associated with Saturn, the god
Yeah.
of darkness and death. And
Right.
we're
Yeah.
trying to shift the darkness into light. Gold is the
Right.
sun, right?
Okay.
And so, that's really fascinating. I like that. I had not heard the bit about the scintillas of gold within the lead. I mean, that feels symbolically coherent, but I just hadn't heard that. No, that's very fascinating. What about if I can just jump around a little bit? The image of the green lion eating the sun, right? I'm sure you've encountered this image. There are, I've always wondered about that. It kind of tickles the symbolism part of my brain. Like, how do you interpret an image like that? Maybe I won't even ask any more of a leading question than that. Like, what does that image mean to you?
Well, it's a very cryptic, very mysterious image, and I don't know how many people, actually know what that looks like, but
Hmm.
basically it's a picture of a lion, and he's literally eating the sun. Um,
Mm.
so we have to decode that a little bit, and to do that, there is no one easy answer because I've researched this, and there are many different
Right.
interpretations, and you picked a really tough one.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the place to begin is to understand what the lion represents. It's like a dream. Every bit of a dream has is loaded with meaning. So we have to kind of, look at the different elements. The
Mhm.
lion, he's green or it's green. Well, he's green because it is a male lion. And the sun.
Yeah.
The um, the green, I guess I'll begin with the green part. The green part represents healing.
Mhm.
Um, it's no small wonder that uh, they say money isn't everything, but it's sure nice to have it, and it's green.
Mm.
Um, the lion and the sun have an affinity. Um, the sun itself is the symbol of the self or the ego, and it's being devoured. Now, how do we translate that into chemical operation is to understand the where the work in alchemy begins. And it begins with something that's called the prima materia, the prime substance. And the whole tenor of the work in alchemy is to reduce things. This is where the word analysis comes in. Now, lysis in analysis means to loosen. And so we want to loosen what the lead is, which is really, you're fixated, you're stuck. But as you start to break it apart, you get down to its most elemental particulate form. Alchemy is defined in many different ways, and one of them that I like is the study of essence. This
Mm.
is why alchemy is so different than chemistry. Chemistry has lost all touch with soul, with the eternal part of who we are. It's lost touch with the soul. It's lost touch basically with who we are essentially. So the green lion, all right, is devouring ego consciousness, which is really puts us into the first stage of alchemy, which is called the Negrito. These, the language here, there's a lot of Latin terms because we're dealing with medieval language, which was the
Right.
focus basically of Jungian psychology. But the words are really simple. I mean, if you understand, for example, Negrito, which is the first stage, there are three, sometimes four stages. Then the first stage is the Negrita, which means blackening. And at each stage, and this comes out in my first book, we do some kind of work. We have a particular archetype that we're working with. In the first stage, we're dealing with the Negrito, which is a horrendous place to be because it has to do with shadow. It has
Right.
to do with the very thing that we push away and we deny and sometimes think it's evil, which it's really not. Um, so the first, that devouring, the lion is devouring, is putting us in that first stage, and that's where we begin doing shadow work.
Okay.
Uh,
Mm.
I think I'll say, and I mean, we can go on and
Yeah.
on.
No. This is
Yeah,
great. No. So it's like the lion is taking the ego and devouring it,
yeah,
killing it in a sense, bringing it into this lower nigredo stage so that it can be purified and
yes.
eventually moved through the rest of the process.
The rest of the process, and this is very key. One
Mm.
of the foundational recipes. And by the way, I use recipes, but we can just call them formulas or
Mhm.
even algorithms. All right. But in those days, it was called a recipe. But the
Mhm.
principal recipe here, to your point, to elaborate that a little bit, again, Latin, solve et coagula, which means to dissolve and coagulate, separate and then bring it back together.
Mhm.
But when you do that, you're bringing it back in a more refined form at a higher level of consciousness.
Yeah.
That is the heart and soul of Jungian therapy. In Jungian language, that would be the solvia coagula would come to mean Differentiation is not just a separation, it's a finer, subtle separation of what you're trying to break down into a particulate form. But then the second part, and that's the second part, is the reintegration. So much of the individuation process, which means fulfilling your full potential, is founded on that essential recipe, solve et coagula, separate and reunite in a finer form.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I know you wrote a book about Osiris, and I just taught a class on Dionysus, and in
Yeah.
one of the variants of his myth, he's ripped apart by the Titans in the
Yeah.
Sparagmos, which is a word I'm sure you've encountered,
Right.
and then eventually he's put back together and becomes Dionysus, one of the highest gods, right? And so,
Right.
um,
Right.
it's
Right.
it's interesting to see the way these things sort of recur through different imaginal
Right.
occurrences throughout history, because I think it is sort of the nature of human life. We always are going through that sort of coming apart and coming together.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's where we want to transmute or transform breakdowns into breakthroughs.
that's beautiful. Yeah, that's a really great pithy one-liner to give to people. It's like that's the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
work. No,
Yeah.
that's great.
And by the way, I don't want to confound history with mythology.
Mm. Say more about that.
Campbell put it really well, I think. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist,
Of course.
if I have this right, he said that dreams were, and I'm not, this is not verbatim, but essentially he said that dreams are inward mythologies, mythologies are external dreams.
Hmm.
The point being, Jung's psychology is a psychology of the unconscious. All right. And which is something that most people, it's kind of an open secret. We all kind of know it exists, but you can't, put your hands around it. It's more about mythology carries collective wisdom.
Hmm.
It really is the narrative, I would say, of the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Um, One of the phrases that I like that I came up with, I don't know where I wrote it, but I do repeat it quite often, and I think there's truth to it. It comes from Santayana. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. See, that's not solve coagula. That's just lateral. It's not upward movement. It's not transformation.
Hmm.
But I changed that. If we don't learn from mythology, we're doomed to repeat history.
That's great. I like that. I really like that. As someone who thinks about mythology 24/7, I think you're exactly right. I really do. We're not getting the meaning that's embedded in these ancient myths that have come down to us through some miracle for, three,
Exactly.
4, 5,000 years. And
Exactly.
we're missing exactly what we need in order to move culture along in a healthier way. So that's a whole different talk we could maybe get tied up into. Um, but
Well,
yeah, it
that
sounds like,
also leads into AI, which that's a whole other subject. But yeah,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe we'll have a part two someday. So I do want to give you some time to talk about the class itself. So could you tell us a little bit about Alchemy on Mars and, what made you want to do this class and why Mars, yeah, just maybe
yeah,
say a little bit of that.
anger.
Okay. That's Mars. He's here.
Yes, right. Yeah. I've been studying, teaching, writing, working with alchemy for decades, and I have to admit, it's almost confessional in saying this, but I'm a little ticked off that this precious art, this precious occult art that was formulated by dozens, if not hundreds of very wise people, is missed, is not understood for the beauty that it offers, the practical importance that it can give life in terms of healing. Um, I've been giving courses now through Jung Academy now for a few years, and I've been introducing the subject. I've been doing kind of like piecemeal, and it's been very well received, and I'm glad to hear that because I want in every way possible to bring what to me is meaningful and precious and put it into people's daily lives. But I have to admit that there is growing annoyance, with people who got their head in the sand And I would say that this set of seminars is meant as a corrective,
Mm,
um, to lend some insight, not just historically, but the very foundations of all of the things that, I mean, we all interact with medicine. And by the way, MARS is an acronym. We
mhm.
all interact, in some way, with medicine, art in whatever form, whether it's going to the movies or reading a good book, religion. What more do I have to say about that? And of course, science.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of do a quick little visualization here, it would help understand the structure, and why I'm even doing this. And it all pivots on the word understand.
Hmm.
I love words, and I love that, sometimes we gloss over the very literal construction of even a word like understand. So here's the visualization that I would ask people to do. If you just draw a line, okay, and below that line is the under, it's the bottom part, it is the unconscious. Under, that's the first part of the word, under. The second part of the word is stand. What is a stand? It's something that supports, okay? So in that world, beneath the level of waking consciousness, we have support. But where is the support coming from? To give it a name and where I begin, and it's going to sound kind of droll, but if you've ever been to my seminars, they're anything but, is philosophy.
Mm,
Because I think philosophy is like the root. It gives support to all of what's above the line, and what's above the line are the things I've just mentioned: medicine,
yeah.
art, religion, and science. So, one way of understanding alchemy is to think of it as an applied philosophy. And so, this course, has to do with the foundation and how it informs all of the things in our daily lives. Why is that important? It goes right back to what I said earlier. Jung psychology is a depth psychology.
Yeah.
Depth has to do with the soul. It has to do with that eternal part of ourselves. Alchemy, particularly the way Jung writes about it, was formulated mostly by physicians. They weren't
Mhm.
called physicians, they were called natural philosophers, but they were all practicing doctors, physicians. So there really is an healing essence to this that leads more to resolution of problems that we have than quick fixes. So this course, this set of seminar, is to add depth by informing people, of when you go to the doctor, and you talk about scientists, there's a history behind that quite frankly, most people who are physicians, science are not even aware of.
Right.
I have my caseload, I have many physicians who, don't even know what the RX, on a
Right.
prescription pad symbolizes,
Mhm.
as a prayer to Jupiter. Um, so anyway, that's the gist of, what each of these seminars will be devoted. So we set the foundation. The first one has to do with alchemical philosophy, so that it's a lot more than just changing lead into gold.
Yeah.
When we talk about medicine, the way I begin talking about that is the incredible story about phosphorus that actually was discovered by an alchemist, stirring, heating up vats of urine. Uh, but you have to understand, why urine was so important to them. You need to understand that, doctors don't always wear white coats. They used to wear black coats. So it's a very colorful, presentation, because you get into some of the details that most people are not aware of. The art, well, art, we can get into surrealism and, all of what art serves. Religion is really a very deep subject that Jung gets into, talking about God having a shadow and what does that mean for us in practical terms. And then finally, science. And science is the most exciting part, perhaps, because all of the developments beginning in 1900, Max Planck talking about introducing quantum physics, because that is where psyche and soma can and are coming together. And that's our future. I mean, it's happening now, but that's our future. So
Yeah.
that's the quick summary of what the seminars will be devoted to.
Yeah. No, I mean that's absolutely fascinating. Alchemy is, in some sense, the intellectual ancestor, or at least influence, to so many of those things that you mentioned. And
Absolutely.
that sounds phenomenal. I'm gonna hop in the class myself and check it out. So I'm
Great.
excited for that.
Happy to have you.
Yeah. Now, will you be able to? Will you address any of the practical side of this stuff in the course as well?
Less, I'll be quite
Okay.
frank, because I've done that in previous seminars. This is more of a global view.
Hmm.
I'm not going to ignore that, but some of my other seminars were more focused on, how do you do it? Dreams. I work a lot with dreams, psychological typology, but I take even psychological type, as Jung talked about it and wrote about it, to
Hmm.
kind of introduce, for example, how each of the four functions has a mythological background. So that, for
Ooh.
example, and the symbolism. So that, for example, the intuition has to do with the salamander. It has to do with intuition. Has to do with inspiration. It has to do with the element of fire. Um, uh,
Yeah.
Sensation, the sensate has to do with earth. It has to do with gnomes. These are the elementals. It has to do
Yeah.
with grounding. I mean, there is all of that. I won't be really getting too much into that, but I will be bringing in some clinical examples, examples of synchronicity and stuff like that. So it's not just heady stuff. I'm not
Mhm.
interested in just armchair
Right.
philosophy here. Alchemy is an applied philosophy. What, I think that these courses are aimed not at fixing things, at just throwing, do this and do that. I'm less interested in the method than I am in some kind of internal change. And that is the way we elevate the subject to a higher level of consciousness.
Hmm. Yeah. What is it? It's whenever a chemical reaction happens, both pieces are forever changed. Is
One
that
of my
something like that?
favorite quotes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean
That
that
has a
sounds
lot to
great.
do, it has a lot to do with the royal marriage. And
Hmm.
anyway, yes, it's a lovely quote. Yes.
Yeah. The royal marriage, and so that's often depicted as the sun and the moon, or the masculine and feminine coming together. Is that right?
The royal marriage is another word for the philosopher's stone. It's
Okay.
another word for gold. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I like the royal marriage because it both works internally, what we call intrapsychically, but also interpersonally. And so it
Hmm.
really is the communion that you're having with the contrasexual aspect of your personality. For
I see.
men, that would be the soul, which is called the anima. For the woman, it's animus, which is spirit. So that's the kind of internal work that we're doing, particularly in the second stage, the albedo, the white stage.
Mm.
But it's also operating interpersonally. Now, what's interesting about that is a lot to do with projection, and it has to do with the creation of what Jung calls the tertium, the third thing.
Mm.
Oftentimes, I don't do it any longer, but when I did marital therapy, I oftentimes found that the warring opposites of men and women yelling at each other, they're failing to recognize that there's a third thing, and they will sooner change for the service of the third thing, which is the relationship itself.
Yes.
Otherwise, they get into these ego battles.
Yep.
So, there's a real practical application of alchemy to using the royal marriage as a model, both interpersonally as well as working within yourself.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I've talked about that as like the spirit of the relationship itself needs to be the focus, not that. Yep. No, that's very
Yeah.
beautiful. And I hadn't thought of the way that connects all the way back to alchemy, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, I have a couple quick questions for you, and then I want to, give you a chance to talk about the class a little bit more. But I'm curious, the gnomes, the salamanders, does that go back to Paracelsus?
You just mentioned my favorite alchemist.
All right, I had a feeling, because he's one of the ones that got me interested.
I love Paracelsus. For those who
That's
don't
good.
know, Paracelsus was born somewhere in the 1500s and grew up in the 1600s. He was a radical. I
Mm.
mean, a radical. The quick story about Paracelsus is that up until hundreds of years going back before Paracelsus, there were two models of medicine: Hippocrates with temperament and Galen, and these two created medical theory that lasted and was practiced literally for hundreds of years. And it was founded on two forces, mercury and sulfur. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but when we get to Paracelsus, he introduces a third force, and that's the salt. So
I didn't know that was him.
basically, what you have here is sulfur represents soul because it's animating. You've got Mercury, who represents the mercurial spirit, and then Paracelsus comes along and introduces salt, which is a structure. It's earth. It's grounding. So these are
Mm,
the three forces that that we manipulate. For example, if there's too much mercury, you can get a person who's manicky,
right.
um, etc. So Paracelsus, was really revolutionary, not just for that, but more particularly, and this is pretty wild, pretty accepted even by science, and that is, he really is the father of toxicology. So
Mm,
he would be applying small doses of poison, which is really the way when I was a kid, well, even now you get all these vaccines. Some of them are micro doses of the very toxin. So it's very homeopathic because then that little tiny dose stimulates an immunological response that could last for years. Well,
mm,
all of that goes back to a phrase that comes right out of Paracelsus, and that is the dose makes the medicine. The idea of dosing poison was radical for the time. So
mm.
Paracelsus is really an amazing, very modern in many respects. I don't know that this is true, but I've read somewhere that the word unconscious was first used by an alchemist, and that was Paracelsus.
Wow.
And
I wouldn't be
you know,
surprised.
and all of his writing is, like most alchemists, wild. I mean, there's a lot of mythological creatures, elementals, so salamanders and undines and
Right, right.
gnomes. It represents a different, much more mythological and colorful sense of the way that these people, with the lack of the technology that we have at our disposal today, use their imagination. This was all expressive. Now, that said, some of it was meant to keep the art secret and out of the hands who would misuse it.
Right.
People called puffers and charlatans, and people were just out to make gold out of, lead just for money reasons.
Mm.
Many of them who ended up hanging from the gallows.
Yeah, that's a whole other
Yeah.
side of this. No, that's great, and what a great intro to Paracelsus. I mean, he's the one who I read a couple of quotes from him, and that's what started my own personal interest in alchemy.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, incredible figure. So I think that's an interesting question to look at too. I mean, like, how just for curiosity's sake, how much do you think that it's the sort of abstract, spiritual, mental concepts that are trying to be described here, maybe they need a mythical, symbolic language to be expressed and preserved adequately. That's one thing. The other thing is they were trying to keep it secret and they give you a hint, but you need the like master apprentice, knowledge to unlock that hint. Both of these things seem to be at play. Do you have a sense for just how much is intentionally secret versus it's just this is the way they
Well,
communicate it?
I'll answer that by, and this is something that anybody who watches TV any night, when it comes to the commercials, we are bombarded with, this drug or that drug, all of these magical things that it's going to do for you.
Right.
Which unfortunately, and if anything really pisses me off about those commercials, is when they very quickly
Yeah. Yeah.
recite all of the side effects. And what really gets me is I don't believe that death is a side effect.
Right. Yeah. It's
And it's
crazy to see.
very
Yeah.
common that these are listed in there. But the reason why it comes to mind is the words, the names that they give this are cryptic and
Mm,
weird, you
yeah.
know? Everywhere is weird as the alchemical language was.
That's a good point. Yeah, I've always wondered who's on the payroll coming up with names for drugs that are definitely made up words that do not relate to the chemical in the drug. Like, I do not know. It's an amazing, weird
But you
phenomenon.
can't even pronounce them.
Right. Right.
These are kind of like a throwback to magical spells. You know,
Yeah. Well.
there's an expression, yesterday's magic is tomorrow's science.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think that's evidenced in what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, the Greek word pharmakos means both witchcraft and medicine. I mean, that
Well, a
says it.
pharmacon is both, but
Hmm.
again, that's where Paracelsus comes in because then how you dose the poison will make it more of a healing medicine than something that will kill you.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Important to remember. I think there's a lot of ways in which maybe we need to examine the dosages of things we're getting right now. Like the 24-hour news cycle has become more like the 24-minute news cycle. I think our doses are a little off with some of that. Um, yeah,
This is a very dark period that we're in.
yeah.
And I'm not just
Maybe it's
talking about this country, I'm talking about the world.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. But
All the more reason why we need alchemy.
we got to turn that dark into light. That's what it is.
That's what it is, exactly.
Uh, all right, so we're wrapping up on time. I was just wondering if there's any, we want our audience to learn what they need to know about your class, and if there's one thing about the class you're most excited about that's gonna make people make the decision to sign up. What would it be?
Change.
Hmm.
We forget that nature is not something outside of us, that we are nature. We are nature.
Yeah.
And we are in participating not just in change, repetitive, iterative kinds of change. What really excites me and what I'm hoping to get across is transformation. Alchemy is the art of transformation. And if ever, but sometimes you have to go down deep into the mud and, turn on the TV and watch wars being waged, senseless killing, murders, the rest of it. We are in an egredo place. But you have to go down before you can go up. Jesus had said, I'm not a Bible expert, but what I've heard is that he had to visit after he was entombed and left the tomb. He descended into hell before he was able to resurrect. And that's my wish, that's my hope, that's my motive for doing these seminars is to help contribute to lift us out of this morass, out of the chaos and into something that's more sublime.
It's beautiful. Yeah, and it's important work. Um, yeah, I think it was definitely wise to invoke Jesus. He, the he everything, the worst possible execution for the least deserving guy, going straight to hell when he dies. But it said that by his going to hell, he defeats death. And I think that's what we need to remember. I think it's very alchemical.
Yeah, but
Whether
you also have to recognize that Mary
Mhm.
was her assumption was body. It was also she was physically lifted into heaven. That's the salt, you see.
Oh, interesting.
And by the
Hmm.
way, I don't want to kind of get pigeonholed into Christianity because alchemy is an occult science. It's not even a science, it's not even art because that division really hadn't happened yet. But all you need to do is recognize that every religion has its dark occult side, whether we're talking about Kabbalah for Jewish mysticism, or we're talking about Islam, and the Sufis, or Christianity. So this is time to shine a light, on something that is the open secret. We all know about these things. We just haven't put them together.
Yeah. I mean, even earlier, you invoked Campbell, right? The hero's journey. The hero always has to go through the dark night of the soul and get initiated before he can rise back up and meet the goddess. I mean, that's the same pattern as the alchemical process.
The only problem I have with that is that it's not a circle, it's a spiral.
I love that. Yeah. And that's why maybe alchemy is a little more useful. Yeah. I agree with you there.
Because the
Um,
spiral takes you to a higher level of awareness.
Ideally. Yes. Yes.
Otherwise, you're just going back around like a dog chasing its tail. A lot of
Right.
energy, no movement.
Yeah. No, that's a very important point. I think that's true. That's worth recognizing. So if people wanted to work with you or find out more about your books and things like that, where should they go?
Well, I have a couple of websites. The work the one of them is called cavallicoaching.com. gives you, an introduction to, my services and what I offer. The older one is Alchemical Works,
Hmm.
which is a little bit more expansive about what alchemy is and what have you. So it's
Great.
cavallicoaching.com or alchemicalworks.com. People are welcome to email me. I'm on my emails all day long because I'm communicating with people all over the world,
Mm.
particularly in this country. And that's my last name, Cavalli, spelled in reverse.
Okay.
ILLAVAC at hotmail.com.
Okay, great. Excellent. And I know you've published two books so far?
Two books, but I publish articles and journal
Hmm.
articles every year. A lot of book and movie reviews and analysis.
Hmm. Oh,
I'm
cool.
working on one now that's a review of Frankenstein, which
Wow.
relates to Mary Shelley, who had a real interest in alchemy. And there's another series that I just finished watching called The Beast in Me, which has a
Okay.
lot to do with our relationship, owning our shadow. So I do book reviews as well. I'm working on a new book now for a couple of years. I'm still working on it. The tentative title is called The Making of the One Thing, A Guide to Alchemical Psychology.
Wow.
Uh, by the way, that it's very poignant why I named it The Making of the One Thing. Because as you yourself said, and most people, if they know anything about the Emerald Tablet, from which that phrase "as above, so below" comes from, they always leave off the second part of the recipe. As above, so below, for the making of the one thing. The one
Mm.
thing is the philosopher's stone. It's the gold.
Mm. Wow, that's a great note to leave on. Actually, I'm really excited about that. That new book sounds amazing. I want to read your review of Frankenstein because I just finished watching it, um,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and my girlfriend said I have to watch The Beast in Me, and I haven't yet. So I'm gonna maybe
It's a tough one, but it's a good one.
Okay, that's good to hear. Well, thank you, Tom. This has been really phenomenal. I could keep you for another hour and just ask you all my own personal alchemy questions because I've been studying this stuff a little bit,
Great,
myself,
great.
and there's just so much symbolism in there.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I guess
Well,
we can
thank
leave
you.
it here.
I really appreciate the ambiance, the connection. Because to me, that's the alchemy.
Likewise. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again. So yeah, take Tom's class, Alchemy on Mars, Jung Academy, starting in January. Um, all
Super
right.
Bowl Sunday.
Super Bowl Sunday. I'd rather be in
But
your
it
class. So
doesn't interfere with the game because I'm a football addict and
there you
I will
go.
be sure to end it on time. So we'll have plenty of time to do the understanding as well as our, gladiators
Yeah.
duking it out.
It's a great way to look at it. We're back to Mars again. Well, that's great. All right. Well, thank you, Tom, and take care, and see you in class.